Good afternoon. I'm Andy Mackie, and I specialise in marine worms, marine bristle worms. But today I'm talking about not just the marine ones, but predominantly marine ones. And so well, not traditionally because it keeps changing, but generally up until a few years ago, you would say that the annelids, the segmented worms, segmented bristle worms they've got bristles, they would be divided up into different classes, and you would have oligochaetes, leeches, hirundinea, and this is a small group of leech-like organisms, and then the largest group would be the polychaetes, the marine worms. But with the advent of molecular work with DNA analysis and things, the situation's changed. Also, I should say that the oligochaetes and the leeches, that they form a group called the Eulaliaclavata. But with the DNA, what's happened is that these Eulaliaclavata actually, they actually nest within the polychaetes. So in other words, polychaetes really doesn't exist. Polychaetes are annelids, and what we now call polychaetes is really everything else apart from these ones. But they're all annelids, and I should say that polychaetes, the name explains what they are. They're marine segmented, they're not just marine, but they're segmented worms with the bristles, but they've got lots of bristles, hence the poly. The earthworms, oligochaetes, they've got very few bristles, and that's why they're called oligochaetes. So, everybody knows about earthworms. These are from my compost bin. These are compost worms. Everybody, if you've got a compost heap, you'll notice these. They're very prolific, and they're quite chunky worms. I mean, 9-10 centimetres or more. Obviously, the length they can stretch out, but they're quite chunky relatively. Marine worms, this is actually quite a big one. They're actually, in contrast, they're very, very thin and much smaller. So this one's only about 3.5 centimetres, but you can see the difference in shape. They have very few bristles in each segment all along the body. So there's a big difference between them. In Britain, there's about, I think, 29 earthworms. There's a lot more marine oligochaetes, but as I said, they're tiny, and they'll be a lot smaller than even that one. Leeches, there's quite a few leeches around. This one's a medicinal leech from Biofarm. They farm them along the way there, outside Swansea, and they use them for medicinal reasons, to keep the blood flow going in certain operations and things, or where people have had maybe a finger knocked off or something, to keep the tissue healthy. And they also, I think they breed them for fishing as well. Marine worms, marine leeches are smaller. They're not really studied that much. And this one was it's not actually from Wales, it's from off northwest Norway, and this was in the sample. It's probably just come off a fish, like a skate or something. And you see it's only about 4.5 centimetres long, whereas you can see this one, they can be quite enormous. You will get them in your garden as well, and people occasionally, especially after wet weather, will ring up the museum and say we've got well, sometimes they think it's a New Zealand flatworm, but often it turns out, and these can be about a foot long, and they can also burrow down into the clay soil. So I've had people digging trenches in their garden and come across this, which kind of freaks them out. But they actually eat earthworms. The free-living sort of horse leech, they're be called. And recently I've been involved with Cardiff University. They're doing various projects on crayfish, and this crayfish is the signal crayfish. It's immigrant, a bit of a pest, because it carries an organism that is detrimental to the native crayfish. But there's a population where these worms turned up, and these worms, there was 2 species on this crayfish, and this is the larger one. It says about 9 millimeters, but it can stretch to about 17 millimeters. This one can stretch to about 9 millimeters or so, and this one tends to live on the abdomen, round about the legs and on the carapace, and this one on the cheilipeds, on the claws. And they can be, these especially, can be incredibly abundant, so the whole inside palm of the claw can be covered in these worms, which are attached, because they're leech-like, they've got a sucker at one end, which they attach to the crayfish, and then they have a mouth up here with little jaws, and they swing around on the in the water, so they make the claws look a little bit furry if you just notice them in the water. If they're out of the water, they look like little jelly blobs on the crayfish. But anyway, these turned out. This is the same worm, but stretched out different lengths. The 2 different species. This one is the PhD student at Cardiff University did the DNA on them, and as well as we did the morphology, and it turns out to be this Xeronogaiton victoriensis. This is from west coast of USA, Canada. Similarly, this one, it's Cambara Nickelax. Morphologically, it seems to be this Acadiae, which again, well, it's actually described from Japan, but it's reckoned it came from west coast of the USA. But when the DNA for this one was done, it turned out not to be identical to the DNA that's recorded for the one in Canada. So we think there may be a species complex here. Morphologically, it looks very similar, but the DNA says it's something different. I should say in America, there's dozens, probably, I don't know, hundreds of different species of these things on crayfish. In the UK, I think there's only one supposedly native one. So these 2 turning up, that's 2 invasive species turning up. It's quite significant. And that was the paper that came out of it. So quite an interesting thing to turn up. Whether it will spread or whatever, we don't know. Obviously, somebody's imported the crayfish and then set them loose. And this is becoming a big problem in the marine side as well, where, I don't know if you saw in the paper recently, there was somebody let loose some American lobsters. They liberated them from, they bought them in a shop live and then set them free. And so this is the sort of thing that's happening. And, you know, we don't know fully the extent of that these animals will have against the native fauna. So it's a big problem, and we'll come back to this later on. So polychaete worms, most people will have seen sort of lugworm or ragworm. And they might also have noticed traces of worms. These tubes, you're walking along on the shore, maybe at Rosilli Bay or something, you'll see these things sticking up, probably just about this bit above the sand. I don't actually have one picture of this, but this is a worm. It's a terabellid worm, spaghetti worm, and it has lots of tentacles. These are its gills, its branched gills, and it is in the tube, and it puts its tentacles in among these strands, which it builds tree-like structure, and it filters particles from the water. It's quite a long worm. You can see this one's out of its tube. This is the underside. These are the glandular pads in the thoracic region. And so people may notice these, not know what they are, but these are worm tubes. And you'll see them on any sort of sandy shore. Lugworm, there's 2 species of Aranicola in Britain. This one, colloquially known as the black lug, has been known for years and years, but people just thought it was some sort of variant. And then Peter Cadman, who was studying at Swansea University, they did some morphological and genetic work on it, and and showed that it was a different species. It has different habitats. It lives in a J-shaped tube, whereas Aranicola marina, the blowlug, the common one, is in a U-shaped tube. The cast tends to be very neat and tidy, and people, again, you would see these traces if you walk along the shore, whereas if it was Aranicola marina, the blowlug, this would just be all scattered all over the place, like no sort of pattern. Now, I said it was called a black lug, but that's not strictly true because it can be different colours. So here's one, and you can see it's quite a big worm. This one's about 26 centimetres long. They can grow bigger than that. Now, these are some Aranicola marina, the blowlug, but these are juvenile ones, or young ones, shall I say, not juvenile. These are young, probably just about a year old. I collected these in West Angle Bay. The interesting thing, you probably can't see, but the interesting thing is that this one, this white bit here, that's sperm, and you can see just a few little circles here. These are eggs. So it's quite surprising to me that a worm that's only about 4 centimetres long has already become reproductive. People have done work in the laboratory on these and managed to get them to be reproductive in a year, but I didn't realise that they were getting reproductive in the field as well. This is an animal which is topical because it's called Ophelia, which we've had a lot of Ophelia news recently. Ophelia Bicornis, this is from Bury Inlet, and this animal, this is a preserved specimen. They're not very common, they only occur in very loose, clean sand, and when this is alive, it's a very beautiful sort of emerald greenish colour with red in it. But I just wanted to show you this because this is typically what specimens look like in museums. Once you put them, preserve them, and keep them, they go white. So mostly what you're going to see in the following is going to be live animals. So this is a type of ragworm. This is called Anthes inerrata. This lives in tubes under stones. This one's from Sully Island. This one's about 12.5 centimetres, but they will grow larger than that. It's a ragworm. It hasn't got its jaws out, but it has a pharynx here. It can push it out with 2 serrated jaws on it. But it lives in a tube, as I said, under stones. Quite an attractive worm colour-wise. Again, from Sully, this lives in crevices. Quite a big worm as well. This is Pfizer sanguinea, originally described from Devon in the early 1800s. By Colonel Montague. And this animal has some quite fearsome jaws, but if I actually sort of uncover it in a crevice, it's actually quite docile. It doesn't wriggle around or anything, it just sits there. I think it's kind of puzzled with what's happened. And that's its head region. You can see it has antennae here. The 2 lower ones are called palps. But they're all sensory structures. So it's got a very attractive greenish iridescent skin. This is a paddle worm. This is a thing called Eulaliaclavata. For many, many years, everybody who got these green worms on the shore would call them Eulalia viridis, viridis being green. But again, people have done some studies and separated this one off, Eulaliaclavata, and this is the common one we get in our waters. You can get Eulalia viridis as well, but this is the one that most people get. So for a long time, people have been misidentifying them. And this is a theme with worms, which you'll get to know. There's another paddle worm. There's a very long one. This is from Oxwich Bay. And this is its pharynx has been pushed out. This is what it uses to feed. It shoots this out to grab prey and things. And the structures on here, these large globular type papillae, and then these smaller ones. These are the sort of things that people use to identify these worms. But you know, quite an impressive worm. You often find this in the leeches tubes. So I'm not sure if they're using the leachy tubes for habitat or for a house, or whether they're going in there and eating the worm that lives in the tube. This is a scale worm. This is from Menai Bridge. This is actually a young one. This is only 4 centimetres long. These can grow 4 times or more the length. It has scales along its back, like roof tiles on a house, and it lives under stones. It's a sort of scavenger. People will see these again on the shore. This has been partially removed from its tube. This is a keel worm, and you can see there's a keel here. This is what gives it its name. So this is a serpulid worm. It's got this fan-type structure which it uses for feeding and for respiration, and then otherwise it lives in the tube. So if anything disturbs it, this operculum will shut off the end of the tube. There's 2 species of Spirobranchus in our waters, Spirobranchus tricheta and Spirobranchus lamarcki. This is a lamarcki. And you'll get these on the rocks and stones, on the shore and also subliterally. Another worm you'll come across on the shore is Balerdi, a honeycomb worm. And these can form massive reefs. There's quite substantial congregations of these in South Wales, in the Severn Estuary and Bristol Channel, and they also occur subliterally as well, but mostly on the shore. If you go to France, you can get areas where these form reefs that are several metres high. So thousands of little worms all congregating together to form this structure. And this is one poking out. It has this sort of operculum as well, a different type of operculum made up of sort of golden bristles, which it shuts off the entrance to its tube with, especially not just for defence, but also when the tide goes out to stop desiccation. Commensal species. You often get other worms. You get worms living with other worms. And this is the head end of a thing called Harmathoid glabra, another type of scale worm. And it can be found in the burrows alongside Nickelax. So it makes use of the burrow to have a home. This one is just a head region. It's actually only 2/3 of the worm was sort of complete. The other third was regenerating, which is another trick that these worms can do. So some things obviously had a bite out of it, and it's had to regrow its tail end. Right, other commensal ones. This one is another type of ragworm. It lives with hermit crab, Bicornis bernardus, and you can see the worm coming out here, and it's pinching the food from the hermit crab. That's what it looks like if you get it out of the shell. This one's about 14 centimetres long. That's a close-up of its head region. So again, another type of ragworm, very sort of orangey colour, patterned, and they are specific to living with the hermit crab. When they reproduce, they modify their bodies and they swim up into the water column to reproduce. This is a male, and then they unfortunately die. And anybody who's young children, you may have come across this book. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth a read. It's a charming story of the organisms, including the worm, which share the hermit crab's shell. Again, with invasive species, this is something that's come in the last 15 or so years, 15, 20 years. And initially it was quite rare to find these, but now you can find them on most shores, and they've become very successful. It's Bacardia proboscidea. They're actually not just found in Britain. Originally it was described from California, but they're found in Australia and South Africa, in the Far East, and they produce 2 types of larvae, one that swims into the water, one that's a larger one that sits still and eats egg mass. And because of this strategy, it can really cope with anything, and it's taking over lots of habitats of similar worms in Britain. So again, a bit of a pest, becoming a bit of a pest. Just a quick thing about our work, our offshore work. We've collaborated with, especially with Bangor University, but also using Swansea University's boats. So that's Prince Madoc and Noctiluca. Noctiluca's just been replaced, and these are the areas we've looked at over since 1989. So most of the Southern Irish Sea, top of the Celtic Sea, Outer Bristol Channel, and also we've done some sampling up in the estuary. We haven't done any between Worm's Head and Lavernack Point, and we haven't done any from Anglesey to Liverpool Bay, but otherwise we've got quite good coverage of the seas around Wales. And these have been produced into reports we've published in the museum. You might have seen some of them down in the Icon suite. And we've analysed the diversity and sediment relations and things, and we've worked with British Geological Survey and Countryside Council for Wales, as it was, or Natural Resources Wales now, and also worked with Irish institutions to do this. So one of the things we've found in this is we found new species new to science, and it's just a quick run through. This is Scalabregma celticum. This was originally described from Milford Haven. Again, this was known for a long time, but it was thought to be a reproductive stage of Scalabregma inflatum, which is the common one in our waters. But I did this piece of work and showed that they were separate, and that's a live picture. The previous picture was from the collection, so this is a preserved specimen, and this is a live specimen. It's not my photograph, it's David Fennick, works down in Cornwall, and you can see it's got these orange eyes. There's other differences, but quite a nice looking worm. Another worm described from the Irish Sea from our work is this Diploceras stopbowitzi. It differs from the common one that we get is Diploceras glaucus. This one's got a completely different papillation pattern on it, and some other differences, and also lives in a different habitat. And this was a paper describing that. It's called Diploceras because it's got two types of gills. It's got these long, thin ones. It's got 4 of them, and it's got 4 sort of cuneate, sort of wedge-shaped gills here. These are actually longer than that. These are actually 2 palps that you use to feed. And this whole bit can be retracted inside the anterior of the body. Another one is this Anza Sprayer, and this was very unusual because we found this in stiff boulder clay off the off the west of Anglesey. And this is it's not normally blue. We've stained it up to show the glands, but this is all that's known about Anza Sprayerids in the world. This is the holotype. This is one of 3 specimens from California. This is the only specimen of this species known. It's from Oregon, and we've got hundreds of these off Anglesey. And it's also the largest species as well. So quite an interesting find. That's what it looks like if you do drawings. And the Diploceras is found in the coarse gravels, and the Anza Sprayer is found in boulder clay in deep water, 140, 170 metres west of Anglesey. With molecular work, as I said earlier, we find new species. So my colleagues in Sweden, Arne Nygren and Fredrik Pleo, Humida sanguinea, they decided that they did DNA work on it and also morphology and photographs. They found that the one species was actually 10 species in Europe. This is one I collected in West Angle Bay. It actually morphologically looks similar to Humida bahusiensis, but Arne has done the DNA for it, and he says it's closer to the Humida sanguinea group. So there's a lot of complications happening. So-called cryptic species, morphologically similar, erroneously classified as a single species. Now, they're erroneously classified basically because we're not looking close enough, or we're not looking at the right things. In some cases, it may be almost impossible to tell them apart, but often there are differences if you know to look for them. So part of Arne's work is these cryptic species, this is not my work, but it's just to illustrate, he's been looking at, so he's looking at 50 morphological species. He does the DNA work. He actually finds there's 90 there. 51 of them are new to science, but only 5 of them are named so far. So similarly, in a wider scale, morphological species looked at 52, species interpreted from molecular data, 146. So you can see that there's a big problem here. So cryptic species are common, at least certainly in the ones he's been looked at. In the region scale, 50 morphological species studied, nearly half of the biodiversity is neglected using traditional morphology. And in the Northeast Atlantic, increases to 2/3. So we're actually missing 2/3 of the biodiversity because we can't recognize the species. So, Welsh lessons. Invasive species are arriving. We don't really know what kind of effect some of these are going to have. We have a big problem actually even knowing sometimes if they are invasive because we don't really know exactly what we've got in our waters. I mean, we reckon that there's 1,000 species in our waters, but from the DNA work, that may be much, much more. So we don't really have a good baseline. And might remember, we're one of the better parts of the world that thought they knew what they were looking at. Species new to science are waiting to be discovered in our waters. So-called cryptic species are more common, much more common than we thought. So essentially, biodiversity in the worm field is very much underestimated. Now, that's just in the worms. I don't know what happens when you start going looking at other groups. You may find that there's similar things going to happen in the mollusks and also the crustaceans, which is quite a frightening thought. But, so that's it. While you're in the museum, don't forget to go and see Wriggle. We have an exhibition on the wonderful world of worms. And also Cardiff Curator. If you're on Twitter and you visit Cardiff Curator, you'll get what's going on in the museum, get updates. You can also visit it online as well. So that's it.